is it? Yeah. I'll use a little bit of this now. Order, order. Before I call Neil Gray to move the motion, can I point out that 8 honourable members have put down to speak in this debate, and we also have the wind-ups. The wind-ups will be started at 5:10, and depending on how long Mr Gray chooses to speak, and of course it is his debate, we will be having a time limit. Can I ask, if people are here to make interventions, that they are kept brief and are mindful of colleagues that may wish to speak later on in the debate. I call Mr Neil Gray to move the motion.
It's delighted to be leading this debate with you in the chair, and I beg to move that this House has considered the role of fathers in the family unit. Can I start, first of all, by saying one of my proudest moments, not only as a father but as a parliamentarian, was taking my young daughter and son through the voting lobbies with me on Friday to see the bill brought by my honourable friend from Banff-and-Buchan pass its final stages in the Commons. Hopefully, by ratifying the Istanbul Convention on Gender-Based Violence, we will be taking another step to eradicate domestic violence and violence against women and girls. And it's thanks to Nick Thorpe of Fathers Network Scotland and Frank Young from the Centre for Social Justice that I've brought this debate here today. I was involved in a very small way to help promote Scotland's Year of the Dad in 2016, but it was from a meeting with Nick relatively recently that I agreed to do what I could to help promote the reflection on last year and to encourage something similar elsewhere in the UK. Dad, father, stand-in dad, daddy, stepdad, foster father, adoptive dad, daddies that have to be mummies too. There are so many ways to describe the male role in the family, but it's something, its meaning is slowly starting to change. In 2016, Scotland celebrated the Year of the Dad to help promote the contribution fathers or those in a fatherly role make to child development, families and society, but also to provide greater understanding of the benefits reaped from organisations acknowledging the family roles of men. It was established by Fathers Network Scotland and supported by the Scottish Government because we are at a tipping point in our cultural evolution. As the project's review paper states, the old stereotypes of dad as breadwinner and mum as caregiver no longer serve us in an age of increasing diversity and gender equality at home, work and throughout society. The year saw 95 events reaching nearly 1,500 people, over 500,000 people reached through media coverage and tens of thousands of visits to the website where more than 40 resource documents for families, services and employers were available. 5,800 individuals and 1,300 organisations signed up to the campaign in 2016, highlighting the positive message about fatherhood and the importance of dads in child development and parenting. It should be obvious, but recognising the role fathers play, or should play, does not in any way diminish the role mothers play. Quite the opposite. I'm clear, and the research shows, that society as a whole benefits from the positive involvement of fathers. The increased well-being, confidence and educational attainment of children is the biggest benefit as I see it. And so getting it right for fathers is about getting it right for every child. And in supporting the Year of the Dad in 2016, the Scottish Government was clear that it was a central part of its gender equality policy as well. Male parental leave is key to narrowing the pay gap which disgracefully still exists for women. Clearly, it is all about choices and giving parents the ability to choose what is best for them. But from a public policy perspective, we need to change societal norms in order to give parents a better opportunity to choose what is right for them. The current vicious circle of expensive childcare, low pay and societal pressures on women and men keeps many women in the primary caregiver role instead of allowing them to return to the workplace if that is what they want to do. Last week, after patiently waiting almost a year for the UK Government to respond to the recommendations on tackling the gender pay gap, the Women and Equality Select Committee set out their 3 priorities for the Government, including a more effective policy on shared parental leave. Unless the UK Government recognises the value of men and women sharing care responsibilities equally and actually encourages men to take parental leave, we aren't going to see any changes to current behaviour. And recent research from PwC found that on current trends, it would take another 24 years to close the gender pay gap between men and women, which is clearly unacceptable. If a woman faces discrimination when she returns to the workplace after having a child, such as not receiving a promotion in line with her male counterparts or being dismissed for requesting flexible working hours, it does not incentivise men to do more at home to care for their children. Of course, some men do not need incentives. They want to be at home more, but workplace norms make that request an awkward one to make. Why should he be at home when his wife could be there? Indeed, research from Plymouth University from earlier this year stated that dads face a fatherhood forfeit when applying for part-time employment in the workplace. This is where dads who want to work reduced hours or on a flexible basis being perceived as suspicious or deviant, and questions being raised about their commitment. The SNP Scottish Government is working hard to promote and reward flexible working and childcare in Scotland using our devolved powers. It has supported the Happy to Talk Flexible job advert strapline, which I added to my own recent job adverts. And working in partnership with Family Friendly Working Scotland, it has supported the award of Top Employers for Working Families. The award ceremony for this year is taking place next week, and I look forward to attend. The Scottish Government is also committed to almost doubling free early learning and childcare to 1,140 hours a year by 2020. And the UK Government need to make sure that advice and support is available to fathers to ensure they are aware of their rights to paternity and parental leave. And by all means.
I'm very grateful for the giving way. He's making an excellent speech, and I congratulate him on securing this important debate. Did you see the very helpful Barnardo's briefing for this debate, where they point out that without appropriate support, young and vulnerable fathers in particular can end up feeling isolated and marginalised by services and agencies, and went on to recommend that local authorities should have an identified lead professional responsible for coordinating work.
Interventions
Sorry.
are brief, otherwise I shall just overrule them.
My apologies.
Neil Gray.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. I think that is sage advice from Barnardo's, as is often and normally the case from that organisation. Shared parental leave was introduced by the last UK government, but there was a widespread admission, including from its architect Joe Swinson, that the current policy does not go far enough. We need to ensure that employers are supported in offering all employees the opportunity to take a period of leave to care for their child, so that the responsibility does not fall de facto on women's shoulders. An effective shared parental policy will help both men at home and women at work as well. It also helps the economy. A study by the Centre for Economics and Business Research from 2014, it suggests that a work from anywhere culture would add an extra 11.5 billion a year to the UK economy. Now, clearly, some mums want to stay at home for as long as possible and would not choose to share parental leave with their partner. I can perfectly understand that. But where we are failing is helping the mums who want to return to work and the dads who want to spend more time at home. And in a similar vein, employees now have the right to request flexible working, but there is no definition of what that means, nor the compulsion employers to do anything other than just consider it. We are starting rightly to move as a society away from the definition of fathers as the breadwinning disciplinarians, but we haven't caught up in the workplace yet. The shift in the desire of fathers to be more involved at home does not match the predicted uptake of parental leave by men of between 2 to 8%. There is still a reticence from men to ask to be at home more, and a market expectation on them to continue the traditional role as working breadwinners. The only way to shift societal norms is to support or incentivise behaviour through policy. But employment law is currently decided here at Westminster, and this UK government must acknowledge the reality that gender-based discrimination against both men and women is not only hugely detrimental to individuals and our society, but actually harming our continued economic growth. And so, in conclusion, there was no prouder or more important moment of my life than when I became a father, on either occasion, in case my daughter or son look back on this and suggest any favouritism. But fatherhood, parenthood, is clearly not a single event. It is a lifelong adventure and responsibility. My experiences as a dad are already different from my father's own, as society moves on. Year of the Dad highlighted why being a dad is so important, and I've raised this issue today in order to suggest to the UK Government that it needs to do more to help in that regard. We need to support the changing societal ideas about what being a dad is about, and support employers so that dads can live up to the new expectations and aspirations of fathers. And so finally, I make an offer today to the Minister to help constructively to ensure the UK Government's employment law is directed towards supporting all mums and dads to be able to make the choices that are right for them and for their children.
Before I call the next speaker, we are operating on a 4-minute time limit. Ranil Jayawardena. Sorry.
Thank you, Mrs. Lane. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'm pleased to speak in this debate and follow Mr. Gray, the proposer of this debate, because I'm a father too. I'm a father of 2 little daughters, one who's barely a month old, one who's 2. And I agree with him that fatherhood is a lifelong commitment. And fathers are, I agree with him, part of a family unit. Mothers matter too. And we should consider, in my view, the role that fathers and mothers play together as families. Families sometimes do need help. And I believe there is a role for government to make sure that families get the help that they need when they need it most. Which is why I am concerned that the tax burden on families is much higher in the UK than it is elsewhere in the world. What do I mean? Well, at the OECD average wage for the UK of £36,017, the tax burden is 20% greater than the OECD average on single parents with 2 children, and 26% greater on one-earner married couples with 2 children. So this unfavourable position for single-earner households, whether single parents or single-earner, mainly results from the fact that the UK income tax does not take account of marriage or family responsibilities sufficiently. And this puts a burden on both fathers and mothers, which I think we need to be mindful of. And I just want to put that in context, because the UK does have low taxes overall. Indeed, I contrast it with the position of single-earner families where there are single people without family responsibilities, which pay 8% less than the OECD average, 21% less than the EU 15 average, and 19% less than the EU 21 average. So I do believe there is a role for government to consider the support that they can provide families in the tax system, to recognise that, yes, there may be some families, plenty in my constituency, where both spouses working is totally the norm. But there are also many families where, for whatever reason, be it because one spouse can't work, be it because one spouse feels that they want to be at home, that I don't think government should tell families this is what they must do. I don't think government should tell families that both people have to go to work and that childcare will be provided for you. It should be families to decide these things. It should be for mothers and fathers to make these decisions for their children. And so in that vein, I do think that government should be more neutral on these matters and say, yes, great, we're going to do more to provide childcare for those people who want it. And the government's got a great agenda ahead on that. But it should also set out that where people want to look after their own children, they shouldn't be forgotten. And I think the statistic is that there is £1 trillion worth of unpaid work in this country each year. That's a huge, a phenomenal amount of work that goes on totally under the radar, uncaptured by most statistics. And I think it is very, very important that we don't allow there to be forgotten people up and down this land. There is good that government can do, and it can do it for married families as well.
Member for Airdrie and Shotts for this very, very important debate, and I wanted to make a small contribution as the chair of the all-parliamentary group on fatherhood. Can I also welcome the work of the Women and Equalities Select Committee for looking at this very, very important issue and solidarity that all fathers across the country have got from that. Mrs Main, I think this is a cross-party issue and really ought to command the attention of all political parties. Unfortunately, somehow the political class in this country is behind the general public. And all political parties have, to some extent, sometimes been hijacked by other agendas within their own party. In my party, I think the attention on rights, and particularly on women's rights and children's rights, as important as those two rights are, and as much as I would stand by them, have sometimes drowned out the ability to talk about fatherhood. I think also sometimes in my own political tradition, our emphasis on the state and the state's support, particularly for poorer families, poorer fathers, has meant that we have sometimes tended to think the state did everything and have found it hard to talk about children and the role of fathers in relation to that. And for colleagues on the political right of the spectrum, sometimes, just sometimes, the emphasis solely on marriage and sometimes the way in which you might use the state and tax breaks to deal with marriage has made it difficult to talk about other sorts of arrangements in our country, to talk specifically about fathers, and sometimes the language can slip into talking about feckless fathers. Perhaps those are the reasons we stand so far behind so many of our continental European brothers and sisters in other countries who are much further forward on this agenda. It's deeply worrying when you look at the figures on parental leave that they are so low for fathers. It's really worrying that we aren't in a place where we recognise, as the public do, that couples make these decisions every day of the week. You give them a year or so to take off to care for children. They will decide between them who's going to do what section, what bit. What we know is that fathers want to spend time with their children. They want to be engaged right from the get-go. How can we as a state facilitate that? I was really worried when I was mooting changes to child benefit, that there were a very strong group who believe that you can't give dad the child benefit or put it in his name because he's going to run off down the pub with the money. It seems to me that was a very old-fashioned view. It's not my experience of the fathers that I meet up and down the country in the work that I've been doing. And I'm very worried particularly about young fathers, how we support young men. You can't deal with teenage pregnancy unless you are supporting young fathers, thinking about their housing, thinking about how they're going to be connected to their children, and thinking about the way in which we've got public services that really don't respond to young fathers, particularly from a working class background, white or black. There are some children's centres that haven't even got a male toilet in them. Such is their low expectation of these fathers. So there's much to do, and I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman in bringing this important debate.
Steve Double.
Thank you very much, Mrs Main. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and it's a pleasure also to join follow the Honourable Member for Tottenham, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Airdrie and Shotts in securing this very important debate. As far as I'm concerned, being a dad is the best thing in the world. It is the most important job I will ever do. I often say to people that even if our nation was unfortunate enough to have me as their Prime Minister, I would still consider being dad to my boys far more important than that role. But we do live, sadly, in a situation today where there is a crisis, a growing crisis, of absent fathers in our country. It is a sad fact that 3 million children in the UK live in lone parent families, and 86% of these families are headed by the child's mother. When we talk about family breakdown, what we are actually talking about far more often than not is dad leaving the family home. There are 1 million children today in our country who have no meaningful contact with their father at all, and a 15-year-old boy today is far more likely to have a smartphone than he is a father at home. And that surely has to be a wake-up call to our country of what is going on today. Fatherhood should be seen as a social justice priority. It is my view that unless we tackle and seek to address the issue of absent fathers and provide more support for fathers to be better dads today, we will not effectively address the issues of social justice and social mobility in our nation. Children from low-income households who have an active father figure at home are 25% more likely to escape the relative poverty that they are growing up in. At its most extreme, 76% of all male prisoners come from households without a father figure in the home. Boys with little or no involvement with their fathers are twice as likely to become offenders compared to boys with highly involved dads. Research commissioned and collated by Care for the Family found that children with dads involved in their lives had better attitudes towards school, better behaviour at school, higher educational expectations, greater school progress, higher qualifications and greater enjoyment from being at school. Surely these are all things that we should want for every one of our children. Now, can I stress at this point that I am not putting down households of single mothers. I know from my own experience of helping lone parents who the vast majority of the time are single mothers, that they provide a loving, caring and positive environment for their children, and they are often the unsung heroes of excellent parenting, even in challenging circumstances. But we cannot ignore the fact that we do have a crisis of fatherhood going on. And as the Honourable Member from Tottenham alluded to, I believe there is changing attitudes in our country today. There is a far greater desire among particularly millennial fathers to be more involved in their children's lives, whatever their particular situation with regard to a family. And we should welcome that and support it. And so I would simply put to the Minister today that I believe the government should be doing more to support fathers. And I would ask whether the government would consider following the example of Scotland, who last year had a year of the dad. It's not often that I congratulate the SNP, but on this occasion I'm more than happy to, and call for a UK-wide Year of the Dad, where we can celebrate, support and promote the important role of fathers in our country. I would also ask the Minister whether the government would consider putting together a working group of colleagues with an interest and experience in this issue, in conjunction with the government's forthcoming Social Justice Green Paper, to work to identify policies that are effective in supporting fathers. Mrs May, this issue is far too important to leave to chance. We need the government to take a lead and put policies in place to support dads.
Simon Danczuk.
Thank you, Mrs May. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Let me also thank the Honourable Member for Airdrie and Shotts for calling what is a very important debate, and I'm pleased to follow the Honourable Member. I thought he made an outstanding contribution to the debate, as did my right honourable friend for Tottenham, who I think made a passionate and smart speech in relation to these important issues. I also shared the honourable gentleman's view that I wasn't aware of this particular Year of the Dad until earlier in the week, and I started researching it, and I agree that we could see it rolled out not just in Scotland as it has been, but also across England, Wales and indeed Northern Ireland. I think that would be very much welcome. I thought, from what I've studied of this particular campaign, overwhelmingly positive. Businesses, charities, the public sector, organisations all coming out to promote and celebrate the role of fathers, I think is particularly to be appreciated. I read his comments on Politics Home website with regard to the shocking low number of men who take up parental leave, and I think we have to do a lot to change the culture so that men feel more comfortable in terms of approaching their employers to be able to take that time off to support the children and the mothers themselves. The other issue I'd particularly like to raise is about dads' lack of fair access to their children after there's been separation from the partner. And it's often the dad rather than the mother, if we're honest about this issue, as the honourable gentleman made clear. And I think perhaps we have to look at changes in legislation to be able to make access for fathers when a separation has occurred. We have to look at legislation to be able to make that easier and more simple. The other important point that hasn't really been mentioned yet is that around parental alienation. And I think it's particularly important, where one parent, or indeed both parents, when there's been a separation, psychologically harm the child, and it is effectively child abuse, by convincing the child that the other parent is not doing a good job or doesn't love them or something like that. And I think it's something that really does warrant further debate and examination in this place, but also in wider society. Separation, even in the best of circumstances, can cause and exacerbate problems for the individuals involved. Matt O'Connor, founder of Fathers for Justice, has spoken about a number of tragic cases where fathers who've lost contact have quite literally thrown themselves under trains or off bridges. And he's also highlighted Department for Work and Pensions data, which shows that parents who leave their children are almost 3 times more likely to die earlier than average. These statistics quite clearly need some attention. So, in summarising, Mrs Main, I welcome the success of Scotland's Year of the Dad. The campaign should indeed be rolled out right across the country, and we should build upon its successes. It will particularly help fathers who are now separated from their children. Thank you very much indeed.
Selous.
Thank you very much, and I would begin by warmly congratulating the member for Airdrie and Shotts for bringing this important debate before the House. I congratulate him on the tone with which he introduced it, and I'm also very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for Tottenham for saying that he wants to take the party politics out of this issue, because this should be a no-brainer for all of us, something that we can all come together on from different political traditions. We need to be quite rightly careful about the language. We all support the fantastic work that single mums do. Indeed, the reason many of us are passionate about this is that we want to see more help for single mums, and we'd like to help them with that very tough job of being a parent. I remember when Gordon Brown left Downing Street for the last time, he actually said that he was going on to do an even more important job and devote himself fully to being a father to his children, which he viewed as being more important than having been Prime Minister of our country. I'm encouraged, Mrs Main, by the fact that some research from the Early Intervention Foundation, which I know the government is taking very seriously as it works on its social reform white paper, which we're all looking forward to seeing shortly, but that Early Intervention Foundation research stated that the role of fathers is increasingly recognised as an important influence on child development, and I'm grateful to the Tavistock Centre for Couple Relationships for pointing that out. And that hasn't always been the case in the past, and I think it is important that we do recognise that. So therefore, it should be a huge sense of concern to us that there are what is sometimes called dad deserts up and down the country. The Centre for Social Justice has also sent us a very good briefing today, has identified 236 sort of hotspots across the country, and that should be a concern to us from a social justice point of view, from a social equality and inequality standpoint, because I think when the number of fathers in a community diminishes, it gets harder for those fathers who are there to take their role seriously, to be good role models. And I think we also need to think about how we can give, we can make sure that both young women and young men make wise and sensible choices in terms of who they're going to partner with. Young women need to look to men who are going to be the fathers of their children, who are going to be there for the long haul, who will take their important responsibilities seriously. And we need to have frank conversations with young men about the incredible joy but also responsibility of bringing a child into the world. One of the animal charities says, Mrs Main, that a dog is for life, not just for Christmas. How much more should that be true of having a child? Now, I'm impressed with quite a lot that we see in North America in this area. They've had their National Fatherhood Initiative for some time. And again, we see bipartisan support. We see Democrats and Republicans. And President Obama made some incredible speeches on Father's Day. Really, really moving, really, really powerful. Not least because, of course, he didn't see a lot of his own father when he was young. And he said we can pass all the laws in the world, but actually, it does take, parents at home to do the long, hard work of bringing up children. And we want more dads to be present to help mums do that important work. So I know the government takes this area seriously, and I'm encouraged by the research in the Early Intervention Foundation. I know the Minister absolutely gets this issue, and I look forward to what she has to say on it later.
Fernandes, thank you, Mrs May, for your chairmanship of this debate, and I thank the honourable member for calling.
this today. I'm pleased to take part. Strong families, stable relationships, fulfilling familial ties between children and their parents and their grandparents and extended families are the bedrock of our society. But for too long, Mrs. Main, regardless of the party in power, a narrative of deadbeat dads, mothers knowing best, and hapless fathers has prevailed. And a damaging culture has become entrenched in some of our institutions. To be clear, I am not condoning those irresponsible fathers who do not pay their child support upon a divorce or family breakdown, or even worse, as I encountered or am encountering frequently in my surgeries, fathers who deliberately change their employment status from salaried to self-employed in order to escape the radar of HMRC and the Child Support Agency. That is irresponsible. Nor am I condoning the perpetrators of domestic abuse. And as a barrister who had represented victims of domestic abuse, I have seen up front the tragedy that that causes. Mrs. Main, what I am talking about is that the treatment of fathers in the family justice system when a marriage sadly breaks down. The truth is that there are 114,000 divorces per year, half of which involve children. And there are 1 million children growing up without a father in their lives at all. 35% of children of non-resident parents do not see that parent at all. Mrs. Main, that is a tragedy and it is unfair. The truth is that our justice system treats fathers unfairly. Good dads are systematically shut out of their children's lives by the system. 50-50 access is rare. If a father is doing well if he gets a couple of weekends and a weekday per month. If he wants greater access, he needs to perform feats of miracles involving the courts, involving expensive applications, relitigation of facts, and an extended and drawn-out procedure. The debilitating legal framework presumes that the father's equal access is a privilege, not a right. And Mrs. Main, I think that that is unjust. The Children and Families Act in 2014 did go some way in addressing this issue, requiring parental involvement of both parents to be instilled in child arrangement orders. However, Mrs. Main, that parental involvement can be direct or indirect, and there's no minimum access of 50-50. In some of the worst cases, that can be a maximum of a Christmas card or a birthday card every year. How can that be a meaningful relationship between a father and his child? And other problems include the lack of enforcement against resident parents, I have to say, in large part the mothers, who breach those child arrangement orders and stop non-resident parents from seeing their children. Absolutely. They can get away with it without any consequence and any enforcement. And Mrs. Main, I would ask the Minister to consider some ways of reforming that. And lastly, there needs to be an encouragement of more mediation as an alternative to litigation. Many divorces start off amicably and reasonably and end up high conflict and very expensive, ruining the father and the mother, both emotionally and financially. That can be avoided, and there are many examples around the world where that can be seen. Parents need both children, Mrs. Main, and I hope the government will take action to remedy this burning injustice.
Burrowes.
Those for getting this debate, and I declare an interest not just as a father but also as a criminal defence solicitor, and I refer to the latter point because certainly I can amplify the stats made by my friend for St Austell and Newquay, that when I reflect back on my filing cabinet, which were with consistent themes. Yes, there were issues of addictions, there were issues of mental health backgrounds, but the predominant theme was an absence of involvement of fathers in the lives of those young, predominantly men. And so it is clear that we have an interest. It is an issue of social justice that we must take the role of fathers seriously. Yes, 36% of all those male prisoners will come from households without fathers' involvement, but also of those male prisoners, 50% of those will themselves have a child. and we need to take their responsibilities as fathers seriously, those in prison as well. We don't just cast them out from the justice system. Once they have an important role to play in the future of their rehabilitation. When I think of those prolific offenders, when the lights switched on, it was when they had that responsibility not just for themselves and their habits and getting the next fix or the next stolen item. It was when they realised that they were suddenly a father, and they realised, yes, I do good work.
I appreciate the honourable member making this point, because the Year of the Dad campaign specifically went into prisons to talk to fathers in that way. So would he commend that work and encourage the Minister to pick up where Scotland has been leading in that matter?
I agree, and there's also good work in it. My friend has reminded me that a farmer review is particularly looking at the relationship with fathers and making that link, because it's that responsibility for another, that opportunity also for rehabilitation alongside that is so important in the long term. But I also want to recognise this is a route out of poverty. It is a route out of poverty, as mentioned, for at least a 25% route out of poverty by involving fathers in this area. And so we must recognise this, that it makes social and economic sense to take the role of fathers very seriously. It also matters when one's dealing with family relationships and those crucial moments of just having that birth, the early days, the early weeks and months, that maternity services must also involve paternity services. Bernardo's made that point very clearly. The role with the relationship with midwives, with health services must involve fathers. So children's centres and the government are looking at those family hubs that must take seriously how we involve fathers. And there's some good examples of that. I know Mike has seen elsewhere of involving fathers in that work, in the antenatal and the postnatal area, that fathers have a crucial role to play. And sadly, it become too much the middle class preserved with NCTs and the rest of it involving fathers. All of us may have been involved in that. But those, sadly, from more disadvantaged backgrounds aren't involved. We must look very practically how we get fathers involved from the early stages before birth and indeed afterwards. It's also important in terms of education, that preventative work. And I want to pay tribute, I should have said at the beginning, to the Centre for Social Justice for championing the role of fathers, along with all other organisations, but also the Relationships Alliance. The references have been made to them, of recognising the preventative role, the way education can play an important role. Today, the government, quite rightly, have responded to cross-party calls for requirements in primary schools of relationship education and providing the foundation to sex education. That is of crucial importance in terms of the role of fathers and understanding that from a very young age. I have a call it the government. And the Minister is right. She has a cost-cutting role in this area. There's an issue of equality here, and the Minister has a responsibility for equality. We have had a cross-party call that there's an issue of equality dealing with a very practical issue of the joint registration of births. Now, this has been on the table since 2009. Yep. Schedule 6 of the Welfare Reform Act 2009 provides, we've got it in law, for the joint registration of births to ensure that that happens automatically, as it does now with mums. But why not for unmarried fathers?
And is he as concerned as I am that 500,000 fathers are not on birth certificates every decade because of a failure of the political establishment just to sort this easy problem out?
Yes, and it must be implemented, rather than this whole elongated process to go through to get on the birth certificate. There are exceptions already in law to deal with those violent fathers that shouldn't be anywhere near mothers, and we recognise that. It's not an excuse. We must get over this and implement this as soon as possible. It's a very practical measure that we can say, we talk about the role of fathers here. There's lots of ways we can do it. But there's a matter of law here that we all battle for law change. That's happened in 2009. Implement it so we can say loud and clear on the registration certificate that there's a joint enterprise here of mothers and fathers, and that we are taking it seriously. It's there from birth. It should be there in registration, that we're saying loud and clear that mothers matter, of course, and fathers matter too.
Here, here. Here, here.
Before I call the SNP spokesman to wind up, can I point out I'd like to offer Mr Neil Gray just a minute or so at the end of the debate. Thank you. And I call Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much. Mrs Main, can I start by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Airdrie and Shotts, for securing today's debate. We've had a number of speakers, including the member for St Austell and Newquay, who invited us to imagine him as Prime Minister. So I can only point to the White House to say the unexpected can often happen in politics. But it's clear from today's debate that there's an appetite to debate this issue, and we can perhaps revisit the issue in a longer format in the future. And it's also good to hear so many MPs from south of the border looking to copy Scottish Government initiatives. Always a welcome one to hear as an SNP member. But Mrs Main, thankfully the days of dads being passive players in the raising of their children are becoming rarer and rarer. Nowadays, most dads want to get involved in every part of their child's life. The modern day father comes in various forms, as does today's family unit. Today's family unit thankfully no longer has to conform to a traditional parenting paradigm of the man being traditional breadwinner and disciplinarian in the family. He can be single or married, employed or stay-at-home dad, gay or straight, an adoptive or step-parent, and a more than capable caregiver to children facing physical or psychological challenges. Now, the purpose of today's debate is not to downplay the absolutely critical role that the mother plays in the family, but simply to celebrate the father's role and to debate government and workplace policy in this area to discuss what can be done to enhance that role. And speaking from my own personal experience of helping to raise two beautiful daughters of 10 and 6, well, Ailey's 7 in 2 weeks and 4 days, as she's keen to remind us, the modern day father wants to be there at every stage for their child. We want to help feed the baby, change their nappies, read them their bedtime stories, drive them to after-school activities, and actively discourage any interest from any potential suitor until at least their mid-20s. I feel your pain. However, our society still makes it difficult for fathers to be actively involved in raising their children. 53% of millennial dads want to downshift into a less stressful job because they cannot balance the demands of work and family life. Now, speaking personally, if I thought it was difficult to achieve a good work-life balance of my old job, that has pretty much gone out of the window with this one. However, I know that after 2 years in this role that I must try and do better and trying to strike some sort of balance, not just for the sake of my own children, but for my wife, who is a full-time student, part-time worker, and for half the week has to juggle these roles with being a full-time parent with no assistance from me whatsoever. Our economy also retains bias about the role of fathers in the family unit. According to research by the University of Plymouth, fathers face a negative bias from the manager when they seek time off work to take care of their children. And I know from speaking to other dads that workplaces tend to question their commitment to a job should they request a period of flexible working in order to look after their children. This complements a research completed by the University of Edinburgh, which showed that many dads would prefer to lie and say that they have a dentist appointment rather than admitting that they were leaving work to look after their children. I give way to my honourable friend.
Yeah, I'm grateful for my honourable friend for giving way. He's making a very powerful point. Would you agree with me that this problem of fathers not seeking parental time off is more pronounced, particularly with young fathers who are on the outset of their careers? And in fact, those being able to be more flexible in that would actually improve the outcomes for children and for families.
I couldn't agree more, honourable friend. I think we've all seen circumstances where that's definitely been the case, and he makes a powerful point. And before I continue, I'll give way briefly to my honourable friend.
Thank you. Does my honourable friend agree, and thank you obviously for taking that intervention, but before you get in your side again, that the work of the Women Equalities Committee, all of the evidence outlines that there is an economic benefit to fathers playing an active role in their children's lives. The Gender Pay Gap report, the Maternity and Pregnancy Discrimination report, and the new report on fathers in the workplace all outline that.
Well, she wasted a few seconds. I'll just be coming on to that as well. I couldn't agree more with what one of my friends has just said. But these factors help to create a situation where men in the UK still spend only 24 minutes caring for their children for every hour done so by women. Creating policies and having an economy which empowers and promotes the positive role of fathers in the family would help to achieve equality for women. In Sweden, it was found that for every additional month of leave dads take, mums' career earnings increased by 6.7%. However, despite there being some progress, such as the Scottish Government initiative, the Year of the Dad, which my honourable friend spoke of in detail earlier on, which highlights the positive of active dads, there's still a lot of work to do to create an economy which allows dads to achieve an appropriate work-life balance. Mrs Main, the attitudes towards the role of the father have changed somewhat and changed for the better. However, our economy has not adapted to the changing role of the modern dad. I think we would all want to see any dad being able to achieve an appropriate, family-friendly work-life balance. Not only will this benefit the family, but also benefit our economy. But in closing, I think it would be remiss not to speak of those families where the parents' relationship has not survived and there's either no father figure or one whose influence is via scheduled weekly access. Like an increasing number of children, I have experience of growing up in the traditional family unit and then following my parents separating when I was around 8. I've been brought up in my formative years in the main by my mother. While we are talking quite early about promoting parental equality and enhancing the role of fathers, we must ensure that those who bring up children on their own, be they male or female, are fully supported, and we try and end the stigma that the Daily Mail and other such publications attach to such parents. But let's be clear, in the vast majority of single-parent families, it is women who bring up the children and are often vilified in said press, whereas a single father will often be depicted as brave and an all-round good egg. This inherent bias aids no one and must end now. Because the truth is that while we would all like to see every relationship be successful and children brought up in a stable and loving family, this has become more of an exception than a rule. But equally, there can be no doubt that children brought up lovingly in single-parent families have a better environment in which to grow up than children whose parents constantly
I thought
argue,
he said in conclusion of quite a lot.
constantly argue and are trying to stay together for the sake of the child. This rarely works. I don't often say this, in fact, I may never have said it, but I'd like to thank my own mother for doing a fantastic job in raising my sister and I following my parents' separation. I'd like to reiterate there is no one perfect model for perfect parenting.
The honourable
I've got one
gentleman was eating
sentence.
into other members' time. I'm sorry, I have to call the front bench for the
Okay, one
opposition.
sentence. That's typical.
Paula, Sherriff.
Thank you, Mrs Main. It is indeed a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. I would also like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Airdrie and Shotts for securing this very interesting debate today. We know that families come in many shapes and sizes. Regardless of the gender of the parents, children need a safe, loving and stable environment in which to thrive and develop into healthy and happy adults. We also know that many fathers wish to spend significantly more time with their children than they are currently able to so in order to create that loving environment. But many fathers find themselves unable to avoid working long hours or subject to an inflexible working environment that prevents that from sharing the parenting duties more equally. Many of the underlying causes of these issues are inextricably linked to the same deep and corrosive structural barriers that hold women back in the workplace and contribute to a persistent gender pay gap of 18.9%, which at the current rate of progress could take 60 years to close. Occupational segregation, for example, seeing women stuck in low-paid and undervalued sectors of the economy. Women make up over 60% of those earning less than the living wage set by the Living Wage Foundation. Meanwhile, men continue to dominate the best-paid positions. Women made up 67% of the management workforce in entry-level roles, but just 43% of senior managers and 29% of directors. These factors taken together often give families little choice as to whose wage they are reliant upon. Women continue to play a greater role in caring for children and sick or elderly relatives. According to ONS analysis, at the time use data women put in more than double the proportion of unpaid work when it comes to cooking, childcare and housework. As a result, more women work part-time, that's 42% compared to 11%, and these jobs are typically lower paid with fewer opportunities for progression, and so the issue becomes cyclical. The impact of women stuck in low-paid or non-paid caring roles has implications for fathers in the workplace too. Research undertaken by the Trade Union Congress last year shows as many as 2 in 5 new fathers are ineligible for shared parental leave as their partners are not in paid work or they fail to meet the qualifying conditions, preventing fathers from spending time with their newborn children. Can the Minister tell us what steps she is taking to ensure that all new fathers who want to take shared parental leave are able to do so? Another solution to enable greater flexibility for parents is to provide high-quality, universal, affordable childcare, as Labour have promised to do. We believe that childcare can play a vital role in promoting gender equality, in particular by making it easy for parents to balance the competing demands of work and family life. Yet the government's promise of 30 hours free childcare a week to 3- and 4-year-old children of working parents is looking more and more likely to collapse as each day passes. Research by the Family and Childcare Trust shows that providers and local authorities feel that the 30 hours will mean that they are forced to either reduce the total number of places on offer or will simply mean that they no longer remain financially viable. The government have also admitted that the majority of children who are eligible for the current universal 15 hours of childcare per week will not be eligible for the expanded entitlement, leaving hundreds of thousands of children from working families, in particular those with parents on low or insecure incomes, shut out of the 30-hour per week offer. So can the Minister also tell us, therefore, what the Government are going to do to ensure providers and local authorities can afford to provide 30 hours of free childcare? And does she have plans to expand the current entitlement? Finally, the Women and Equality Select Committee report on the gender pay gap recommends increasing paternity rights, particularly around leave, to ensure men can spend more time with a new child. Increased paternity rights for men on top of existing maternity rights would make both men and women's lives better. We know that fathers want to play an active role in their children's lives, and families want to spend more time together with a new baby, which is why Labour would increase both paternity leave and paternity pay. Yet one of the most pervasive underlying causes of the imbalance between men and women's role in the family is workplace discrimination. Government research with the Equality and Human Rights Commission estimates that 54,000 women a year are being forced out of their jobs due to maternity discrimination. So does the Minister agree that extending paternity leave and consequently increasing workplace flexibility will be one way of addressing this appalling discrimination? And does she also agree that access to women suffering maternity discrimination must be able to uphold their rights? Yet, okay, sure. If we had to tackle men to take, if we had to support men to take a greater role in the family unit, and as a consequence tackle the barriers facing women, we need to support men and women to have a real and meaningful choice when it comes to accessing well-paid and family-friendly employment.
Under your stewardship, and I would also like to add my voice to congratulate the Honourable Member for Airdrie and Shotts for securing this really important debate today, and to congratulate both him and other Honourable Members who've done such a great job at articulating very clearly how involving dads in their children's lives is good for the emotional health and well-being of both parents, how it's great for childhood development, but also really very good for society. And as he pointed out, the debate's very timely as the Women and Equality Select Committee recently launched their inquiry into fathers in the workplace. And we welcome this really important inquiry and will look with great interest at what they come up with. The role that fathers play in family life is a subject of great importance for me in my role as Minister for Women and Equalities, but for the government more broadly, and is intrinsically connected with the work we're doing in the GEO to close the gender pay gap. I thank the Honourable Member for drawing the attention of the House to the successful Year of the Dad campaign in Scotland this year. Key to this campaign was highlighting the really important role fathers play in child development. I wholeheartedly support this sentiment. There's nothing more important than a child's development, and the Honourable Member for St Austell and Newquay, among others, asked if we could have a UK-wide Year of the Dad, and it's certainly something that I will give consideration to. It's vitally important that we support fathers and ensure that we encourage businesses, employers and society and more broadly to do the same. We know that dads want to be more involved in their children's lives, and we're committed to supporting them to do it. The role of dads in family life is already changing. Increasingly, men are choosing to work part-time. Although mothers continue to do the majority of the childcare, dads are doing ever more. Dads these days are much more actively involved in their children's lives. They're not afraid to change a dirty nappy or spoon-feed some pureed carrot into an unwilling mouth, and that's great. And the Year of the Dad campaign has rightly sought to advance father-friendly practices among employers and others. So a central part of what we're trying to do in government to ensure that balance between work and family is to tackle the gender pay gap. The gender pay gap actually is at now 18.1%. It's the lowest on record, but we know there is still more to do. And the causes are broad, but we know the time that women spend out of the labour market caring for children is one of them. And so helping fathers and mums to share this responsibility won't only help us to reduce the gender pay gap, but crucially it allows fathers to better balance work and family. It builds stronger relationships between fathers and their kids, but it also actually helps us to build a stronger and more productive economy. And that's why from next month we'll be introducing legislation which requires large employers to publish their gender pay gap. This will shine a light on inequality in business, encourage employers to do more to ensure that they have family-friendly policies in place, and that more than that, they are actively promoting and encouraging their staff to take advantage of these policies. One of these policies that this government has introduced is shared parental leave. This came in April 2015 and enables working parents to share up to 50 weeks of leave and up to 37 weeks of pay in the first year of a child's life if they so wish. And this is designed to give parents more flexibility around who cares for their child in that first year and to give fathers a bigger role. Shared parental leave also helps to strengthen working parents' connection to the labour market, giving more flexibility to combine work with family responsibility, and gives mothers and fathers the opportunity to equalise care and work responsibilities. It's really also very crucial in helping mothers retain that link with the labour market, because having both children and a career shouldn't be a binary choice for either parent. So we hope that shared parental leave will go towards addressing these long-standing gender stereotypes. There is nothing more important in a child's development than the role of parents, and it's essential we support them both to play a full part in their children's life. I think the Honourable Gentleman's got time to sum up at the end, so he can speak then. This government's also extended the right to request flexible working in order to help men and women maintain a better work-life balance. Since June 2014, all employees with 26 weeks continuous service have had the right to request flexible working, and this extension has doubled the number of employees who are able to make a request to over 20 million people. We already have some of the most diverse ranges of working arrangements in Europe. The OECD rates us as the 4th most flexible place to operate a business. Flexible working is becoming steadily more popular. 60% of employees surveyed in 2011 had done some form of flexible working. That was up from 56% in 2006 and continues to rise. It's great news for business and the economy that employers have access to the widest pool of talent, but it's also good for individuals. Very briefly.
Would you agree that it should be parents' decisions as to whether they choose to work or not if they can afford it?
Yeah, absolutely. That is fundamental. The parents should make their own decision about whether they want to work or whether they want to stay at home and look after their children, and which of them decides to do that role. Flexible working can also, of course, allow fathers to spend more valuable time with their children and achieve a better work-life balance. Now, some members and the Women and Equality Select Committee have called for shared parental leave and flexible working to be made compulsory or the regulations extended. All I would say is these are relatively new regulations. They are going to require a culture shift in order for these things to really take off properly, and that's going to take time. I've literally got very little time. If you don't mind, I just want to make a bit of progress at the moment. We will keep... I'm determined that I'm going to keep further action on this in my back pocket to see how these policies bed in just a little bit longer, especially when we bring in the gender pay gap regulations next month, before imposing any further changes which would impose significant cost on business and the public purse. I don't want to do that unnecessarily. With regard to childcare, of course, we know that for families with young children, childcare is not an issue, it's the issue, and is hugely important for both mothers and fathers. That's why we're increasing our spending to a record £6 billion per year by 2020, more than any government ever. That means that we're doubling the childcare entitlement to working parents of 3- and 4-year-olds from 15 hours to 30 hours, and that will start in September 2017. Saving parents who get the full entitlement around £5,000 per year. The Honourable Lady is absolutely wrong. We have 8 early implementer areas who are already delivering that. I've met most of them, and the policy is going really well and is actually making a measurable difference to parents up and down this country. And over 80% of local authorities will see their money going up. We are spending a record amount of money on this. So it's unfortunate scaremongering to say that this isn't going to be a success. This is in addition to the... for the 40% most disadvantaged 2-year-olds, the 15 hours a week we give to them. But for parents who aren't in work that she asked about, we're also helping with 70% of the childcare costs for people on low incomes through the working tax credits, 85% for parents on universal credit. And also shortly we're going to be publishing an early years workforce strategy which aims to support and attract better people into the early years, the best people into the early years workforce, and crucially will include how we can get more men into early years. If we're going to focus on how we get more girls into STEM, it's only right that we should get more boys into caring roles, and this will do something to break down gender stereotypes and ensuring that more men are working in caring professions. With regard to family justice, the member for Rochdale and Fareham mentioned family law, and as the member for Fareham mentioned, the law did change in 2014, bringing in a statutory presumption that both parents should be involved in their children's lives. But I will certainly pass on their comments to my colleagues in the Ministry of Justice, and indeed those of my honourable friend, the member for Enfield and Southgate, around the issue of joint registration. the member for St Austell and Newquay and Enfield Southgate talked about offenders who grew up in fatherless households. And of course, positive family relationships have also been identified as a positive factor in preventing reoffending. For example, research has been found that prisoners who reported improved family relationships while they are in prison were less likely to reoffend after release.
Could I ask the Minister maybe just winds up, because to give just 1 minute to the
Absolutely.
members to vote.
So we're entirely committed to achieving gender parity in the workplace. And I really wanted to conclude by paying tributes to the dads, the stepdads, the foster dads, the granddads, the other remarkable father figures up and down the country, including my own, who are making a positive difference to young lives and old lives on a daily and hourly basis.
First of all, Mrs Main, I'd like to thank all members who have contributed today. It's been a fantastic turnout and a very positive debate, which is what I'd hoped it would be. I'm pleased about the Minister's commitment to considering a UK-wide Year of the Dad. I hope that does take off, and I know that pressure will be put on from other members who've been speaking today to ensure that takes place. I was slightly disappointed that she won't utilise further powers to push shared parental leave and incentivise it better. But most of all, I was clear that this was about being positive about the role of dads, and it's an equality issue. And I'm clear, enhancing and promoting the role of fathers at home helps women at work.
Order, order. Marcus.